As I go from hour 1 to hour 2, and it's a difficult transition for first-timers, but I felt we just have to face this right away. I have to talk about the medium of Achilles even more, and so the title I give to hour 2 is Achilles as Epic Hero and the Idea of Total Recall in Song. Because you see, if we don't appreciate how different this medium is from media that we're used to, where you're simply being exposed to a story, then we don't understand why there's so much at stake for the character of Achilles. So it many reasons for confronting us with these very difficult problems at such an early stage. I didn't want to spare the participants the hard work of coming to grips with what it is about this medium that makes people ready to die for it in order to be in it. And so I start with the first section, first paragraph, again, with the meaning of the key word. And this key word is maybe even more important than other keywords in other hours. It's memnēmai, and I deliberately give it in the first person singular. Grammatically speaking, I remember, but it's not just I remember, I have total recall. This is so important. Then the next section, which is called Phoenix and his total recall, is the proof of concept. It's the illustration that shows you exactly how total recall works when you're dealing with a story within a story. And oftentimes in our project, you can get the big picture much better if you look at a part of the picture and you see how that part works and then try to relate that to the whole. That is what is going to happen with this story inside a story, since the rules of the game are the same rules that apply to the outer narrative, to the whole Iliad, to all 15,000 plus verses. But here, when the old man is telling the story, it's still that same truthfulness, that same guarantee that what is being narrated is the absolute truth. It's the total recall of what really happened. And even though it's not quote-unquote Homer who's telling the story, but a character inside the story who is going to tell how the epic of Meleagros and Kleopatra is relevant to Achilles, all that is going to fit beautifully together. Smaller picture into larger picture. And then the next section, which starts at 12, I call it the idea of kleos as a medium of total recall. And here's where you start realizing that the medium is so self-conscious about itself that it keeps talking about itself and what its powers are. And it helps the group who is listening to this, and we should think of it as an act of listening and not just reading the way we read on a page or on a screen, and how kleos is that kind of a medium. It has that power to tell you exactly what was done, what was said in the heroic age. Then the next one is called the idea of kleos as epic narrative. Now, this is starting to sound more familiar. This is how we try to imagine what the medium is. Sure, we call it such forbidding names as epic, and I keep saying narrative instead of story sometimes, and I do that in order to show that you can do scientific studies of stories and how they work within a society, and how what has a meaning for society also has meaning for the individual. So I have reasons for saying narrative, even though the word is slightly forbidding. But in any case, this is kind of a literary criticism section where I try to connect how the medium works in oral tradition, and then how people who read literature get exposed to this medium by way of reading it. Next section is entitled An Epic Tale Told by Phoenix, and I'm trying to recapture here the excitement of what it is to hear a micro-narrative on the spot. So what is this story of Meleagros and Kleopatra. It's going to be told in a very vivid way. It's very exciting. It's really good storytelling. It's compressed, but the compression sometimes helps because, again, we can see sometimes what the big picture is by looking at what the little picture is. And this masterpiece of compression certainly does that. Then the next section is called the form of epic poetry. And again, I switch back to trying to see, well, how does this medium translate into literature, which then comes all the way down to our times? How do we bridge that gap between what it was like to be told the story in the heroic age and then later on in ancient Greek song culture? And how do we, as people who are not part of that ancient Greek song culture, how can we try to reconstruct what it was like? And so for that, we have to understand what the literature is as well. So that's why I call this the form of epic poetry. And then the next section, to sing the klea andrōn, which I translate as the glories of men. Here is where you really get to appreciate how the medium is a performance medium. It comes alive in performance. Sure, we can talk about how we read meaning from the words, but how are the words given to you? You hear them in a performance, a live performance, and that's what this storytelling is capturing by talking about the klea andrōn, the glories of men, and how Achilles himself can show the way by performing that kind of medium himself. He can do it because he's part of it. And his best friend Patroklos can also do it because he's part of it. Then the next section, which starts at 32, I call it the klea andrōn, glories of men, as heroic song. And here I also compare how traditional societies of other cultures handle this kind of medium, how they look at this kind of medium. And one of the examples that I bring up is the so-called epic tradition, or you can say heroic tradition, of Muslim South Slavic people in the middle of the previous century and even earlier. The klea andrōn of the ancient Greeks, when you start comparing other things to the klea andrōn, will become, I think, even more interesting to you as an example of a living performance medium, even though, of course, it hasn't survived that way to us. Then the next section, I call it the concept of a speech act, and I bring in philosophical, linguistic, literary critical concerns about how when you say something in certain cultures, you're not only saying something, you're doing something, and you're doing something for the record. And that kind of importance that is given to the word is almost unfamiliar to many of us moderns because we're so used to words being just words. Well, in this culture, they're not just words, they're actual deeds. And if you do it right, if you say it right, it's like saying, I do, when you get married. Then I loop back to the epic tale told by Phoenix and try to get a bigger vision. I try to zoom out of what the story is as it was told then and how it really has a meaning for the entire Iliad, all 15,000 verses of it, if you read it carefully, if you read out of it, not into it. And it's actually going to be making your reading of the whole Iliad much easier, even though the actual reading, the close reading of the story as told by Phoenix is not easy. It'll make other things easy, however. Then the next part, I meditate on the emotions of fear and pity. There are many other ways of saying fear and pity, but the idea is that there are certain kinds of emotion that are expressed in song making, in poetry making, that are so powerful that they actually connect the experiences that you see happening to larger-than-life heroes, they connect those experiences with our own emotional world. And I take the opportunity to compare some examples of that kind of thing in other cultures, including something that's very familiar to some of us, which is the world of opera. Then in 59, I say to myself, well, why not look at the story of Meleagros and Kleopatra for its own sake? What does the story really tell that's so powerful about the ancient idea of a hero? This couple goes through all sorts of experiences that are relevant, so relevant to them that it's good to think of how it has meaning for them in the first place before we start applying how the meaning can spread to characters like Achilles. Then the next section, I call it Plato's reading of the Iliad. And this is like a preview of something that I do in a much more intensive way when we get to hours 22 and 23. And when we get that far, we'll see that the choices that are made by Achilles are choices that are so interesting to people in Greek civilization that they just can't stop thinking about it, can't stop talking about it. Now, Plato's a very special creative thinker, and when he feels that way, it's even more intense. But it'll give you a very good idea of what's at stake when Achilles decides to die young. Plato just can't let go of it, and you'll get a very clear idea of that, even though the details will happen later. Last but not least, I loop back to the epic choice of Achilles, which is something that is so all-important that even in the introduction to the whole project, in what I call Hour Zero, I started with this same choice, and I go back to that choice, the epic choice of Achilles, how he wants to be an epic. He wants to be in the medium that we are reading. And I say it so many times in so many ways that the wonder of it all is that we're still participating in that medium that he predicts will last forever.